best podcast ever.
Yeah.
He always like wanks on the guitar too. So.
And he's in his garage, so
Yeah.
I'm copying him.
Yep.
So yeah, go for it. So welcome back to the EPS Podcast, where everything is a primary source. I'm Eric Paul, and what you hear in the background right now is a guitar being played by Jon McCormack, and we're going to talk today about guitars. That's going to be our primary source topic, and this is an exciting episode because this is the very first time I've recorded in my garage/studio, and I had to have Jon over here, and I'll explain later why that is, why it's very appropriate that he's in my my garage, my detached garage, which is of course part of my house and my property. But Jon has been in lots of bands. He's currently in a lot of bands. But what is the kind of guitar that you're playing right now?
So this is a 1974 Gibson Les Paul Deluxe.
And is this your favorite guitar that you have?
This is, well, if I had to be like, you know, they said, which one are you going to be buried with? This would be the one, because this is the one. I got this one when I was a kid, when I was in college, and I've just I played it, you know, all over the place. Played it with Fly Spinach Fly, Starch, Museum of Science, Marijuana. I've played it, you know, this guitar is open for the Ramones. It's been on the stage with Cypress Hill. One time when I was at UNH, Adam Sandler came and he needed a guitar for his act, and so he borrowed it and he played it on the stage.
Cool.
And so it's been around.
A lot of people have, and when it comes to a Les Paul, I mean, to me, it's like the classic, rock and roll guitar.
Yes.
And so it's not like, and you're the guitar expert, not me, so I'm definitely not the person to ask, but I would imagine anybody that knows their way around a guitar is going to be perfectly comfortable playing this one, right? It's not... Well,
yeah, Les Pauls and Stratocasters, I guess you could say, were like the original, like, big-time rock and roll guitars. Les Pauls are known for being kind of heavy.
Yeah.
Particularly heavy one. Hopefully you can hear me. And, so the Les Paul is an interesting one because it was, as the name would imply, sort of developed for and by Les Paul, guitar player, like super incredibly ahead of his time, pioneering guitarist. He actually invented multi-track recording, tape delay, and was just an incredible player. So he was a guy who was hugely, hugely popular in the 50s, and they sort of developed this guitar for him, and it has become and still is like an iconic sort of rock and roll, well, not just rock and roll, but kind of a standard for electric guitar.
So this segues perfectly into the questions that I have. And for those of you just tuning into the EPS podcast for the first time, where everything's a primary source, I have a form. I have a template that I use in my classroom for all primary sources that we deal with, and I apply it to everything. And it starts with what material is this made from and how is it made? So this was made specifically for Les Paul and his style of, so the material really is him, right? And his style of recording or playing.
Well, this is it's a solid body electric guitar, so it's made of wood. And, if you just talk a little bit about the evolution of guitars, they started out as acoustic instruments. We still, of course, have acoustic guitars now, which is basically strings vibrating across a wooden box, which sort of amplifies them and changes the tone. And at a certain point in the... I think it was in the 30s, Charlie Christian, who was a jazz guitar player with Benny Goodman, realized that his sort of hollow body jazz guitar wasn't loud enough to be heard over the orchestra, and then put a guitar pickup on it, which is the thing that picks up, as the name would imply, the sound of the strings and runs it out to an amplifier. So he was kind of the first guy to, and that allowed the guitar to go from being very much a background instrument to more of a foreground instrument, because suddenly it was amplified and you could actually hear it over things like trumpets and saxophones. And he was a player from the late 30s into the early 40s, so talking like boogie woogie era, right? So that led to the evolution, through into rock and roll. Guitars started to become really prominent, but you were still seeing a lot of like hollow body guitars, which are like a hybrid between an acoustic guitar and electric guitar. Think like Chuck Berry, Chet Atkins, anybody who played with Elvis probably had a big fat hollow body.
Yeah, guitar. Like those. Is it Rickenbacker? Is that what those are?
Rickenbackers are a lot of them are semi-hollow. I have some semi-hollow guitars. They're great. We can talk about that too. There's this particular sound that they make. But then I think Les Paul was a guy who came along and wanted the solid body guitar. I don't think he was the first one, but his type of playing, just to get the particular sound he wanted, required a solid body and a certain type of pickups and a lot of sustain. So a big chunk of wood like this typically has a fair amount of sustain, which means
that microphone that stand is awful. It's so like I've had to like just kind of hold it like I'm holding this microphone. Because it just like slowly sinks down, and before you know, you'll be laying on the floor like, oh.
There's stages where that has happened, and sometimes it happens when you look away, and then all of a sudden you're
like, where'd that mic go?
By your feet. So anyway, rambling. So basically, he sort of helped Gibson come up with this design that suited him.
Was Gibson making guitars for a while by this
Gibson
point?
Started out making, I think mandolins and acoustic guitars in the 1800s.
Oh, wow.
Orville Gibson was the guy's name.
So when it comes to how was it made, are these, obviously the model was made specifically for Les Paul, that style, it was handmade, but they are mass produced to a certain degree, right? They're not.
Yeah. Oh yeah, they're definitely mass produced now, and they were even in Les Paul's day. I'm sure the prototypes were not, but by the time he came along, and by the time Gibson started producing these, they were definitely a mass-produced factory item.
And it really says a lot then about that era in music and pop music and rock and roll, that a company's not going to be making lots of something if there's no customers. And so who would be the primary customer, do you think? There's professional musicians, but amateurs too, right?
Oh yeah, well, guitar. I think once the guitar got electrified, acoustic guitars were obviously around. You had a lot of nylon string Spanish guitars and steel string acoustic guitars and country and bluegrass and folk music. That's kind of the sound. Once the electric guitar became a thing, it's interesting to follow the curve, the sort of what I'd call the rise and fall of the electric guitar, because nowadays it's definitely not as anywhere near as prominent as it once was.
Yeah,
it endures. It hasn't gone away, but it doesn't have the place in music or in popular music like it once did, for sure. But once it became amplified, then you had rock and roll, Elvis Presley, and in the 60s was really the decade where it sort of became, I think, like everybody's dream to become a guitar player, because like going into the 60s, the music was like Elvis Presley, Orbison, Only the Lonely,
right?
Still these sort of like lush pop songs without guitar really being featured. And then by the end of the 60s, you have the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, Jimi Hendrix, blowing people's minds with feedback and overdriven electric guitar, Woodstock, and so in that short little 10-year period, really evolved into something that everybody wanted to get their hands on.
Because you see those early footage of Elvis on Ed Sullivan or live concerts and stuff, and it seems like he just has a guitar as like a prop. He's not really playing it that much, and it's more just like a apparatus that he can dance around with and just to signal that he does, he's rock and roll, but it's not really part of the music that he's creating. But then, by the time you get to the end of the 60s, the Beatles, all of them are playing instruments as they sing. And it's not about, it actually would look really weird if one of them was just like, holding a microphone and the other ones are backing him up.
Well, what sort of happened, to your point, in parallel with the evolution of the electric guitar was the evolution of the singer-songwriter, because, prior to the 60s, it was pretty common for, and even up through the 60s, it was pretty common for other people to write the songs, and there were writers and then there were performers, right? So back in the early days of popular music, there were people who wrote and composed music and then performers who played it, and that they weren't really the same person. So, and honestly, Elvis didn't write his, he wrote some, but a lot of his stuff was, debatably either stolen or written by someone else. And as things evolved in the 60s, starting with the Beatles and other groups, it became a thing where, and Bob Dylan, for example, perfect example, the sick person performing the song also became the person who wrote the music.
Right.
Which really wasn't a thing before. So that, I think, it just played into, people wanting to get a guitar in their hands and go, oh, I can do this.
Yeah.
I can actually write songs and I can play songs.
And that probably came from these kind of guitars being mass available that they, from in the previous decade.
Sure.
So it's kind of like a cyclical thing that, once something is mass produced, it becomes more affordable. Uh-huh. People then can pick it up and then self-teach, teach themselves how to play the guitar and then go on to write their own music. And then that feeds into the next generation or so of people that, can to make their own music, and it becomes standard. It, like we said, it would be very odd by the time you get to the early 70s when this guitar was made, to have somebody, pretending to play guitar and, doing, moving around. It's like, it's almost like that's the age of the guitar hero. I was talking with, the manager of the Ramones, Monty A. Melnick, last week for a podcast, and he was saying one of the things that it makes perfect sense for the time period in the 70s that you had people who were like, okay, maybe we've gone too far with the guitar soloing, 20-minute long things. Sure. Let's get back to the early 60s of the song. It drives the song. It's not led by the guitar. Guitar is just part of the overall song sound itself. Oh yeah,
I feel like there were many, many rabbit holes that were followed, with the electric guitar, the minimalist approach, and then the, like talk about, the Grateful Dead or, Deep Purple or bands like that just sort of, or prog rock where, things they really went down this rabbit hole of extending things out. And I love that stuff. And I think now we live in a time when like you sort of have access to all that stuff. Yeah. It all exists out there in some form. Some of it's more niche and industry, indie now.
It's just so funny how that all comes back from the guitar being drowned out. Yeah. That the other instruments, maybe the bands are getting so big that the guitar player is like, I could add a lot more to this if you just turn me up a little bit more.
Well, and then it got taken to a whole different direction, and I think now that there's over the years there's been sort of reactions to it, pushback on it, but there's something very unique and special about it versus other instruments. Not to belittle any other instruments, but there's very few instruments that have the kind of diversity. You plug it into an amplifier, and and then you have effects pedals, and there's so many different things. It started out with just wanting to amplify the sound of the guitar itself. Right. But then it became this whole other thing where suddenly there were all these other colors in the palette where you had overdrive, which, a lot of people credit Dave Davies from the Kinks with inventing overdrive. He actually poked a pencil through the speaker to get that raunchy, overdriven
let's hear it.
Skronk to it. I guess is how he would describe it. And, songs like You Really Got Me and All Day and All the Night, like those songs are the first where you hear that raunchy kind of overdriven, and it had just such an attitude to it that people really responded.
It's almost like replicating sounds in the modern world. Sure. Because an acoustic guitar fits perfectly with 19th century, early 20th century, slower, more agrarian, that kind of sound. But electric guitar and all the sounds you can make with it match are definitely products of urbanization, more industrial sounds. Last summer we were in Memphis and we went to Sun Records, Sun Studios, and they do a fantastic tour there. And part of it, they were saying that Ike Turner is actually the very first to do the distorted guitar sound. Oh. And it was because when they were driving, when they were getting, so not the overdrive thing, but just having a fuzzy sound to it. And I'm probably messing up the story, but when he and his band were driving to get to Memphis to record, they dropped the amplifier off the back of their car, and it got busted.
Yep.
And so they when they got to the studio, they had to fill it up with paper, and the wiring got all messed up. So every time that they played the guitar, it came out with the like a very distorted sound to it. Do you mind playing for a little bit? And as I segue to the next part of this, and I'm going to close the garage door because I'm getting some sound from, so speaking of mechanical industrial sounds, everybody's about to hear that in combination with your guitar as the door comes down into,
little musical segue.
That was awesome. And
noodles, and that's the things you can just noodle on.
Yeah, I mean and that's like such a sound of the last 60 years.
Sure.
I mean, it's not like people on the road below us are like screeching to a halt. Like, what is that? Like it's such like a part of our.
It's iconic, and that became a thing, and it can be very polarizing too, because some people don't want to hear you just noodle. It's a personal thing, like improvising, right? Mm-hmm. For any musician on any instrument is a very personal thing. Like you're sort of, jazz is a great example. Like bebop, I think is very, or some forms of jazz are very inaccessible for some people because it's all about improvisation and just the player expressing themselves in the moment.
Yeah.
Which can be very fun for the player and at times very challenging for the listener, because it's kind of like this person's kind of doing their own personal exploration and you're witnessing this. And I guess if you have an appreciation for that you're a fan, but some people are just like, I don't want to, this guy's just noodling.
But at least it's not noodling on, bagpipes or,
right. More pleasant.
Something
sound.
Like that. It's, it has at least some kind of, I mean, as a society, I think we've come to enjoy the sounds like that.
Yeah.
Of like a bluesy jazz guitar sound, that full tone behind it, rather than, I think it'd be a little bit different if you were shredding through some, speed metal or something like that. People are like, stop noodling now.
Yeah. Which, we do that too.
Right. And that's kind of so this model that you have from 1974, does it reflect the changes in music that took, because between the 50s and the 70s, you have such things as FM radio, which didn't exist, for most of the 60s. And with FM, you have, a fuller sound being able to be produced on the radio, which then I imagine probably influenced musicians in the studio recording that sound. They're like, okay, now I can do more things because the audience can actually hear it. And, hopefully, they don't necessarily need to buy, the record and have the souped up stereo system. They can just listen to the radio and hear it this way. What changes took place to the guitar you have compared to the original Les Paul? Is there more pickups, more?
Well, so that's an interesting question because this if you're a guitar aficionado and specifically a Gibson aficionado, Gibson was purchased in the 70s by a company called Norlin, and the Norlin era guitars are considered to be essentially the worst.
Oh no!
and there are good ones in there, and to me, this is one of the good ones. But they Gibson at that point had sort of had a peak in sort of popularity, and was really in trouble. And so this company Norlin ended up buying the company, and they were really. Suddenly the company wasn't run by musicians, it was run by accountants and people, business people. You could argue that they saved the company, but they cut a lot of corners.
Yeah.
So, and they were trying to catch up with the industry. So the quality control was a little bit inconsistent all over the map. The Les Paul, to your question, I mean, it remained pretty true to the original design, the original formula, but as far as Gibson, they were trying like all these other models that really didn't make it, that didn't survive. They were smart enough to sort of leave the Les Paul alone because it was, their kind of flagship.
Right.
But they did. So this one is a deluxe, which originally had like smaller pickups than the originals. So they just get a little thinner, brighter sound. I've replaced them, but I think they were trying to go after the Fender Stratocaster market, which the Fender Stratocaster is known for like more of a crystal clear. I guess you could more associate it with like blues and country type of tone. And I think they might have been going after some of that because that was really popular at the time. And Fender was very popular at the time. So that's probably what they were trying to do. But for the most part, it's pretty true to the original, but the quality control during that era was abysmal.
That seems to be pretty consistent with that time period of the early 70s where in not just in music but across the board the movie industry was suffering because they had a lot of competition with television, right? More people were like, why go see a movie if I can get a good story on TV and not leave my house? And so the movie industry was really just dominated. It wasn't artists anymore, it was corporations. Sure. They were just like, let's just churn out whatever can make a quick sale, and the
auto industry.
Same kind of thing. They just and so that's another passion of yours is cars.
Sure, yeah.
And there's a lot of good muscle cars from that era, right? But by and large, that's not exactly the height of car.
Yeah, well, in muscle cars like guitars, that a muscle car or a hot rod is a modification of the factory. So like this guitar has been modified to some degree. A lot of guitars get modified. To find one that's truly stock from that time is rare. For that reason, because the people customize them to their taste, but also because the quality wasn't always there and didn't always do what you wanted it to do.
So, and every time, and I'm glad you brought that up because, one of the questions is who made it, but, so Gibson made it, but you've also made it yourself, right? So by modifying it and, somebody knowing what they want to hear, knowing how to best suit it for themselves, it's just like a chopper, it's just like a motorcycle that somebody modifies for their own, personal use. You're making a document of your own of the time period. So over the years that you've had this, what modifications have you made, and is that like a response to the changing sounds of the times?
Oh, for sure. And modifications and repairs. I've actually broken the headstock off this guitar 3 times.
Oh man.
The last time, hopefully for good. Gibsons are kind of known for that, by the way. The angle of the headstock is such that, like, if you drop them the right way, or they get, they have a tendency to snap off. So this one, mostly the pickups I've modified, which is the pickup again is the thing that picks up the sound of the electric guitar string and sends it to the amplifier, and that makes a big difference, in the sound of the guitar. So, for example, when I got this guitar in the 90s, I grew up in the 80s playing 80s hair metal, and I'm still playing an 80s hair metal band. So I have a lot of pointy guitars, and I was, just that was the era that I grew up in, and did that whole thing, the shred thing. I love that stuff. But in college, I heard Soundgarden, and I was like, that's what I want to do. So I went out and bought a Les Paul. I went down the hall. I found this guy that I went to college with, who I'm still friends with, was selling this guitar for $400, which was nothing because he had run out of weed and he needed some dough. And I grabbed this guitar and then immediately didn't love the pickups in it. So I put a very hot, high gain pickup in it to get that 90s kind of riff rock overdriven sound. Think like Soundgarden. This was before Foo Fighters, but like that kind of sound.
Is that pretty standard for a professional guitarist to know how to fix or modify it themselves? Is that, or would you say it's a select part of that population?
I look at it like owning a home, and you'll understand this. Like, there's some stuff you'll do yourself, and then there's some stuff you call somebody.
Yeah.
Depending on your skill level. Like I can, I I can put in an outlet, but if I've got a major electrical problem, I'm calling somebody.
Right.
So it's the same with a guitar. Like there's stuff that, like I usually will bring it to somebody to do wiring, because I can do wiring, but I'm not great at it. And, certainly the last thing you want is for it to like short out in the middle of a show or something. So I'll take it to somebody usually to wire it. But as far as choosing what I want to do with it to fit my taste, I think most guitar players do that. And I think a lot of guitar players, not all, are gearheads, and you get kind of obsessed with gear and the different things they do, and that becomes a whole thing. And I'm at a point where I'm trying to be less of a gearhead, because I'm feeling like I'm so immersed in like the gear that it's taking away from what I'm playing and the time that I spend playing.
I can understand that. It seems like there's, we're living in an era where there's I always see like bands and the musical instruments and I played in bands when I was in high school, not great, but like almost like a pyramid structure of like, there's lots of guitarists, there's just as many basses, because almost every guitarist can play bass if they needed to. It's just a matter of getting the bass.
Yes.
And it seems like drummers are at like the top of the pyramid, in that not only is it the instrument that's sometimes a bit harder to learn, but having the equipment and having the practice space, that's what like most bands have trouble finding. Sure. But guitarists, talented guitarists notwithstanding, but it seems like in the last 60 years, it's not trouble at all to find somebody who plays guitar. How good they are is another thing altogether, but and the style that they play. But it seems that of all the instruments, it's the most accessible.
It is, and I think that sometimes I have this feeling like I'm a guitar player, but we're like a dime a dozen, and I know so many guitar players, just even locally, that are so much better than I am, and I just am like, but it's at that point, it's not about like. It becomes very subjective, because what is good? Like, how do you define good? Like, I know players who play aren't very technically skilled, but they have incredible ideas. That are really nice to listen to. And then I know players who are just unbelievable technicians, like can do things on the guitar that I couldn't even dream of, but don't write songs. So it's two sides of the same coin. And to your point, drummers. I think if you're talking about a band. So I don't know who said this, but I heard years ago, your band is only as good as your drummer. And it's kind of true. Because that is the foundation, that is the rhythm. And like, as a guitar player or a bass player or a singer, you can have amazing rhythm, but if your drummer doesn't...
it's going to sound like garbage. It's going to be just all out of time, and it's going to sound weird. And I think so much of it, though, has... a lot to do with just the kind of the presentation on stage. Very rarely is the drummer anywhere close to stage, like they're always in the back. They're not at the front. The guitar, the way it's held, the way it's used on stage, and the appearance of it has everything to do with, the design of it. Like, if it was a background instrument like it originally was, you wouldn't have, the nice, like, either colors or the way that the sunburst, like the classic look to it, or, the V style ones, or those ridiculous looking, like star ones, or, shape. It's like, because that's what's presented to the audience first and foremost. But on a record, so if you're recording music, you were saying before we hit record that your wife has a really good ear for being able to tell the difference between the kind of guitar that it is. Do you think that's a skill that's only picked up from living with somebody like yourself, or is that something that a lot of people could tell the difference?
Well, I think Nikki naturally has an amazing ear for music, and maybe had she taken to it when she was younger, probably would have been an amazing musician. She is has a great ear for music, and she does play some bass and can sing like amazingly well. Has never really stepped out on stage with it, but I think if she wasn't around me, she wouldn't know the terms, right? So she wouldn't know the difference between a Fender Stratocaster and a Gibson Les Paul, but at this point she can listen to a song and go, I'm pretty sure what we're hearing there is probably like a Gibson Les Paul, because it's got that thick, sort of beefy electric guitar sound, versus, you know, she might, well, that sounds more like a Fender Stratocaster maybe, because it's got that shimmery, clean, like, you know, she can pick up on those differences because she has a good ear, but wouldn't know how to define them if she wasn't with me.
I feel like that's only a skill, though, that can be, like, in the age of guitars, though.
Sure.
You know, it's not, I'm sure, and just recorded music in general, because, you know, of course, if it's a live music, you know, you can always tell. Or if it's like a band that's playing a song, like, and I'm sure this has happened for you, that you record a song, but then when you're playing live, you're not using the exact same equipment that you recorded it with.
No, not at all. I mean, and to your point earlier, like, you know, the guitar visually conveys such an attitude, you know, as much as in some cases what you're playing. Like, looking at this poster of the Ramones that you got on the wall, and like just his stance, the guitar he's playing, the way he's holding it, you know, it's all in keeping with the aesthetic, with the music, with the attitude. It's an attitude, you know, it conveys an attitude. And guitars have that ability. I mean, with a drum kit, somewhat. I mean, if you've got like a sparkly drum kit, you know, with 8 million drums and cymbals, and that sends a message, versus like a small little jazz kit. But it's harder because you're just back there behind it,
right?
But the guitar is just right out front visually, and kind of the way you hold it. You know, is it? And it's funny because they fall into these sort of sometimes cliched silos where it's like, oh, if you're going to play country, you got to have this type of guitar, and it's got to be held this way.
Yeah.
If you're going to play rock, it's got to be like this, and you know. And then sometimes you see people sort of trying to go the other way, ironically, playing, you know, a very pointy '80s guitar and playing like folk music on it,
right.
Which in theory works. Like, if it sounds good, it sounds good, right?
Right.
But it just doesn't have the look.
It doesn't fit, right?
Fit the aesthetic, right? I think I saw, who was it? I think it was Phoebe Bridges. I don't know if you're familiar with her. Was on Saturday Night Live playing like this $120 '80s pointy BC Rich guitar, and then she smashed it at the end, which is probably why she had a cheap one. But it was just very ironic. It was meant to be ironic.
I've seen a lot of like punk bands playing with like the glam metal guitars. Again, just kind of like, you know, I just picked this up at the pawn shop for $20, and you know, I don't care. I don't even tune it, you know. Or, but like Billy Corgan, for example, I remember hearing that part of the reason why so many Smashing Pumpkins songs have that kind of funny feedback sound. Is because when he bought his first guitar as some cheapo, you know, department store thing, and every time he wasn't playing it, it made that sound.
That's
and so it's like, and therefore then we get by the 90s like that. Well, that's alternative rock. You know, if it has that in, he would manufacture that sound after a while because his guitars got better. You know, it wasn't like he wasn't still just using some cheapo, you know, Costco brand or whatever.
Right.
Do you mind if we hear a little bit more on your guitar? I love the sound, and we can. Cool. I have another question coming up.
I'm going to change the sound up here.
Okay.
A bit. Slightly different.
That is a very full sound. That's a nice.
Yeah, it's you know, so that's what you would call a clean electric guitar sound that, you know, I guess more along the lines of what an acoustic guitar would do, but still electrified in its own thing.
That's like the straightforward purpose of electrifying a guitar, though, right? Is to take that acoustic sound, and not having to blast it across, you know, the microphone.
Yeah, it started out as just a volume issue, like how do we make this loud enough to actually hear over other instruments, but then it became its own thing. You know, and again, by the time you got to Jimi Hendrix, and you know, you mentioned feedback. Like, feedback is when the sound from the amplifier literally feeds back into the guitar. And creates this loop where you've just got this, you know, we've all heard it, like this screeching, like, ear shattering. But that became a thing that you could control. Like, Jimi Hendrix was the first guy, I think, to really kind of intentionally make feedback and try to control it in a way that it became almost like another way of playing the guitar.
I remember, I think it was a St. Patrick's Day. I was at some Irish pub and they were going to do a music circle and just invite, and this awful microphone pointed towards the amplifier, big feedback right in our faces. And I'm like, it sounds, but if I was at a rock concert, I'd be like, that, that's cool, man. But like, because of the setting I was in, I was like, oh God, it's
exactly.
so awful. So the next question is, I guess we kind of covered this one. Why did they make it? But the question I'm interested right now is, where was it made? And also the writer that goes along with that is, what locations are associated with. So where's the Gibson plant?
Sure. So Gibson had for many years a plant in Kalamazoo, which I think that's Michigan.
Yes.
And also they had a factory in Memphis and Nashville. I believe they're made in Nashville now, the Gibson USAs. I just was reading something that the old Kalamazoo factory is being turned into like a hard rock hotel or some kind of rock and roll themed hotel, cool. Which kind of makes sense. It's actually really cool looking.
Yeah.
So they, at that point, by the time this guitar was made, they were made in factories, and the process gradually morphed from, being very a hands-on process.
Yeah.
I found somebody actually not long ago on YouTube published this great lost footage from the Gibson factory in I think it was the late 50s or early 60s, and they were making acoustic guitars and electric guitars also, but it really showed the process and the workers, and it was funny because you have these women with beehive hairdos and cat eye glasses, spraying varnish on these guitars. No masks, right. Nothing. They're just spraying, and then
put radium on it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and polishing them, and it was a very hands-on process. I think it's gotten more and more automated as things have gone along, but there is definitely an element of hand, and like everything, craft brewing and automobiles and anything you can think of. There's a cottage industry of people that luthiers, which is what a guitar maker is called, who do everything by hand, handmade. So there's a whole boutique industry now that is a reaction to sort of mass produced guitars. So there's a lot of companies out there that make them very much by hand, using the old ways or new ways, using different materials, but going back to the more careful, handcrafted kind of approach. I put that question onto this form. So this form that I use has evolved and itself is a primary source, I suppose, over the years. And the reason I like the question about where was it made and what locations are associated with it is because it speaks to the trade networks of a place, in this case, the United States, that you could have something made in Michigan or Tennessee, and it makes perfect sense. A place like Memphis or Nashville would have a guitar factory because they're making and recording the music right there. Right.
It's like a music mecca. But anybody across the country who's I like the way that guitar looks, I like the way it sounds, I saw, so-and-so playing it on TV, I want the same one.
Yeah. They
don't have to be fortunate enough to have a guitar factory in their own neighborhood. They can order it online. I was showing you before we record a Boys Life magazine from 1966.
Yeah.
That Boys Life is and I think it still exists, is the publication for the Boy Scouts of America, and so it's a specific audience. It's young men, probably exactly 10, 11, 12 years old. And in the mid 60s, they have several ads in there for get your own guitar.
Right.
And they have catalogs you can order. And even that, if you send a catalog, it means that, it's not wait 6 months and you'll get your guitar. It's wait 2 weeks and you'll get your guitar, and you pay. Yeah. And it says something about our communication networks, our infrastructure, that it's not, and I think that's one of the reasons why the sound itself has traveled and reverberated so much, not to use a pun from guitar play, but sure, throughout the entire country over the last 60 years, is because it's centrally located. It's, you can,
accessible.
I think it's I forget what interstate goes through. I was just on it last summer, but I think it's I-40 that goes through Memphis and Nashville, and you can just pick up, I'm sure there are truckloads of Gibsons going every which direction.
Well, and I think the bulk of guitars are probably manufactured overseas now. There's a lot made in Korea, brands like, so there's Gibson Custom Shop USA, and Fender has a Custom Shop USA. Those are the ones that specifically made in the United States, and you do pay a premium for those. A lot of them are made in Korea. There's a lot of Fenders are made in Mexico, and some of those are great. They're just much more affordable because they're mass produced. The quality isn't quite the same, but there's some gems there. In fact, and now there's a thing called Gibsons. They're Chinese knockoffs. So Gibsons, and I have a Chickenbacher, which is a Chinese Rickenbacker. I just bought a knockoff of because I'm doing an 80s hair metal show, and it had this very specific look to it. It's a knockoff of a Charvel, which is an American brand, and it was like $170, and it's terrible. Like, I shouldn't support it really, because it was just it's violating every trademark law there is. Right. They're just someone got an original one and just measured it and took the spec and then just made it in a factory in China. And the quality is not there, but it's passable. And if you want that look and you don't want to spend a lot of money, you can do it.
Yeah, it's and that I think actually goes to the next a really good question that follows next is, who's the intended audience or user of these guitars? And has that audience changed over the years?
Oh yeah, for sure.
I mean, who is, as of the 70s when that one was made, who do you think because by that time rock and roll had been around for not quite a generation, but I feel like rock has moved, it progressed very quickly. Yeah. By the time you get to the 70s, we're talking big rock concerts, they much bigger venues, huge, festivals, Woodstock had already happened by that point. And so the idea of people that want to hear loud guitars, they want to get that kind of sound out of it, that's still the intended audience, right? Or
well, now it's like everybody. I mean, there's every different kind of genre. I mean, there are certainly genres that don't have any guitar in them, or it's sampled from somewhere else, which is fine. There's an art to that too, and there's creativity involved there for sure. But if you're just specifically talking about guitar, I mean, there's so many different kinds of music and different styles of guitars with different intended audiences depending on what you're looking at. Yeah, I think following the evolution of it, it's a little bit like the automobile industry. I mean, in the 50s and 60s, there were like 3 different manufacturers to choose from. You had Chevy, Ford, Chrysler, and that was kind of it, right? And they each offer a few different models. And then now, look how many we have. There's just so many different kinds, so many different options, and it's the same with guitars. From just having a few different choices to now they're just all over the map, and it's followed musical trends and musical styles. I mean, in the 70s, it was big, Les Pauls and Stratocasters and Marshall amplifiers and bigger, louder, and then then there was pushback against that and kind of quieter, more mellow California sound. Yeah, think like Fleetwood Mac or early Tom Petty, and just more singer-songwriter stuff. Then the 80s came along, and Van Halen came along actually in the late 70s. Love to associate them with the 80s, but their first albums were in the 70s and kind of totally ramped up the electric guitar. Took it to just like Jimi Hendrix had done a decade before, just changed the way people even thought about the electric guitar, right, and what could be done with it. And then that spawned a whole thing, pointy guitars and louder guitars and faster playing, and and in the 90s grunge came along as a reaction to that. So it's very reactionary, and it tends to be.
Would you say the Les Paul has kind of endured throughout the entire period?
I think so. Yeah, it really has. I mean, because if you think about it, like it started. Okay, so in the 60s, people like Eric Clapton sort of made the 58 Les Paul very famous. So the Les Paul actually didn't do particularly well early on. It was more expensive than other guitars. It was a high quality instrument. It wasn't, so when it wasn't something that was easily mass produced, it was kind of expensive and specialized. Yeah. Which is why now, if you can get your hands on like an original 58 or 59, they didn't make that many of them. I mean, some of these, it's ridiculous. And this is another whole tangent. The collector market, some of them go for well into the six figures.
Oh my goodness.
400,000 for these, the kind of guitar you would have seen Eric Clapton playing or Jimmy Page playing, in the 70s. So, that whole market that's a whole different thing, but it's definitely endured. I mean, Jimmy Page kind of carried it through the 70s. Then it became, Les Paul's, I think, became very uncool for a little while in the 80s.
Yeah.
I remember I picked up the one very cheap early on because they just were out of vogue. And then all of a sudden, Slash.
Yeah. I was going to say, it has everything to do with the other media.
Yeah.
Because, you could watch the November Rain video, and there he is, soloing on the cliff or whatever, and he's definitely using a black Les Paul.
Yeah, and the first time I ever saw them, was the Welcome to the Jungle video, which was like, I don't know, 87 or 88, and it's like, Les Pauls were so unfashionable, it was like, oh, that's dinosaur rock, that's Led Zeppelin, that's Aerosmith plays those, you need a pointy guitar, you need a flying V, to be in Whitesnake, and then suddenly there's Slash, and really, if you want to go down the rabbit hole, Guns N' Roses is really kind of a classic rock band.
I've always felt it was unfair that they got lumped in with the hair metal bands, because they were not.
They transcend it.
They are more hard rock, like just club, like LA, street rock kind of music. It's not.
My thing about Pearl Jam, they get lumped in with the 90s grunge thing, but I think there is more to them than that.
Yeah,
they're good songwriters, and they came out of that, but they have endured.
I was going to say, I know that guitar that you're holding right now was made in the 70s, but it looks very 90s to me. Like, it looks like just the color.
Sure.
And not that it was made in the 90s, but it would have been, because the 90s, and I've covered the 90s many times in different forms on this show, and to me it was the collect-all of the last, well, I mean, really millennium, but definitely the last 100 years before of pop culture. And the youth of the 90s in particular was like sorting through all the stuff from the last 100 years or even less, and they're like, oh yeah, I like this, like the deep rich color of it, that. And so even though it wasn't made in the 90s, it looks like it was very accepted in the 90s. Like, you could see a band, and just the lump term that they use, alternative rock band, a guy using that exact guitar. You did, because your band in the 90s would be considered alternative, right?
Well, I think it was a re-embracing of the Les Paul specifically in the 90s, because in part because there was a reaction against the sort of shreddy, pointy guitars that were happening in the 80s, right?
Yeah.
So, and grunge and a lot of 90s music was sort of a pushback against that, because and it's funny, the 80s metal thing gets a bad rap. It's not my favorite form of music, but I have an affection for it because I grew up with it. I was in junior high when that stuff was coming out, and it was just the soundtrack of my youth, and I had a lot of fun, and I learned to play guitar during that time, so it was just there. And I think the early stuff has some actual, I'm talking like Judas Priest and even later Deep Purple and Van Halen. And the early stuff has like an underground substance to it.
Yeah.
Sabbath, and but it quickly got commercialized, and kind of went bananas. And so then by the time the late 80s came along, it was just ridiculous, and everybody was pushing back against it, and so grunge happened. But to your point, I followed that trend as a kid. Like, I remember buying a Les Paul when I was really young, because I was reading magazines about Jimmy Page and Eric Clapton and Jeff Beck playing Les Pauls, so I bought one. And then I traded it in like a fool toward like a pointy 80s guitar, which I still have. And it was actually more 90s. I was obsessed with like Vernon Reid from Living Colour, so I wanted the one that he played. So it wasn't really a pointy 80s guitar. Traded that in, for that, and then ended up getting this one, and it kind of endured.
When you were trading the instruments in, are we talking at like guitar stores, like because even those are signs of their times,
sure?
Right? Because I mean, for a long time it would be, you'd have your local place, independently owned, but then there came the chain. Like, there's Guitar Center now, which is a chain. Yeah, and that was definitely always to me like the centerpiece of any local music scene was it makes perfect sense. Like, any kind of like local car scene would be the garage.
Yeah.
They would all hang out there and, talk shop and trade ideas and fix their stuff. And it seemed like the guitar store maybe lost a little bit of that with the way the corporate world has kind of taken over it.
In the internet, not just the corporate world, but the internet. I mean, I'm very kind of against ordering guitars online. I've done it, but because even the ones that are mass produced are, you're talking about a piece of wood,
right? And
wood is an organic thing that can be very inconsistent. The grain, how it grew, the humidity. There's so many things that affect it that I don't know until I hold it in my hand what it truly sounds like.
Right.
So ordering it out of a catalog to me and spending, a bunch of money on something that I haven't actually held in my hand and to hear how it plays and feels. I just had this conversation with Mark McElroy, who owns Gary's Guitars, which is one of the great, remaining sort of pop music stores, along with like Ralph's House of Tone and a few others. There's a guitar in there that I just picked it up to try out an amplifier. I wasn't even thinking about the guitar.
Yeah.
And I was like, man, this thing sounds so much better than I thought it would. And we had this conversation about you just don't know until you hold it in your hand. If I looked at that guitar in a catalog, I would have just passed right over it. But playing it, I was like, man, this thing actually sounds great.
So it actually goes right back to the original question, because on the one hand, they're mass produced, but on the other, it's not like an article of clothing where the same machine is gonna produce it. It's like the wood itself could be a lot different depending on the source of it, and I don't know. I mean, does the wood come from a specific part of the country too, or part of the world?
Sure, and that's the whole thing, because there's what are called tone woods. So a Les Paul, for example, since we're talking about them, is the I can't see this because it's a podcast, but the main part of the body is mahogany, which is kind of a heavy, dense wood. But then this top, which is carved and figured, this piece is maple.
You know what? Actually, might be a good time for me to, if you don't mind, I'm going to make a video.
Oh yeah,
and I might even do a live. Is that okay for on Instagram?
Yeah,
and you can show a little bit of the guitar, maybe play it a little bit too. So let me get that going. This is
perfect.
The beauty of the internet, which we were just bashing, but let's see.
I don't bash it. It's great for some things. I just don't think it's great for ordering guitars.
Let's see when we go.
So, well, here's the pickups. These pick up the sound of the strings, right? And so, a Les Paul, this beefier piece of the body is made of mahogany, which is kind of a dense, heavy, darker sounding wood. And then this top piece, which is carved and sort of figured like this, if you can see it, almost like a violin, is made of maple. And maple is a much brighter wood. So the idea, and I don't know if this was Les Paul's idea or somebody's idea, was to kind of have the best of both. To have this big, heavy chunk of wood, which will get you a deeper tone and more sustain, theoretically. And then to have this maple top, which will, give you some of the brightness that you want. So, a lot of that's coming from the amplifier, you know, but it would sound different if I plug in a different guitar.
Okay.
And so it always sounds different depending on the wood, depending on the pickups, depending on most guitar players will tell you it's all in your fingers. And I think 90% of it is in your fingers and how you play, but there is absolutely something to the construction of the instrument.
It's amazing how, probably above all, more than any other instrument that you might hear or see on a stage, that it has everything to do all the way back to the kind of tree that grew, and where it grew.
Well, there's an organic element to it. Sorry, and when you get into certain types of music, it doesn't maybe matter as much because you talked about speed metal or something earlier. When you get that much distortion and that many effects going on in an amp, I could play that on, a different guitar. Right. It would sound similar because I'm really, you're relying on the amplifier to give you that nasty, gnarly tone.
Yeah.
But you play differently depending on how it feels. So ultimately, you want a guitar that feels right in your hands. You know,
but I guess what you're saying is that this is probably the most versatile guitar there is, though, right? Because almost everything else is based off of this original.
I feel like, I mean, it's debatable, but I feel like it is because, you know, it's kind of the gold standard. And, you know, there's a company, Paul Reed Smith Guitars, which I'm sure people are familiar with, who kind of made their name by trying to combine the best of a Les Paul with the best of a Stratocaster. I think for a long time, those were the two schools, right? Yeah. You either were a Stratocaster player, and there were things you liked about that, and there was a Les Paul, and there were things you liked about that, and they tried to, like, meet in the middle and get all of the sounds out of both. And it's hard to do. They did a great job at it. I think a lot of people swear by those guitars, and I've owned them, and they're great. But, yeah, it is kind of a very versatile instrument. I mean, you can get sounds you wouldn't expect out of a Les Paul. You know, like it's known for having a big, beefy, sort of meaty sound, but you can still do the, like, you know, if you want to play Prince. Oops. You can get those sounds.
And you don't need the guitar that looks like the symbol for the artist formerly to play that.
Interlude.
Yeah.
That was me kind of botching a song that I wrote for one of my own albums.
That's so funny.
Haven't played it in a while.
So I think one of the questions I wanted to bring up is, I'd say about 15, 10, probably a little bit longer, somewhere 15 years ago or more, those games became really popular. Guitar Hero,
yes,
and Rock Band and stuff like that. And you know, I think I played them like once, and I was just like, it was funny because people were becoming famous on YouTube and stuff for playing those things, and I'm like, I don't think that actually carries over very well to actually playing guitar. And it seemed at that time that what had lasted for a few generations of like a teenager watching TV, watching MTV, watching, you know, listening to the music and be like, I want to do that too. Mm-hmm. We're over. Like, there was definitely a gap in bands being made, you know, garage bands, and in favor of that kind of thing. Do you have an explanation as to why? Because I mean, now you can go to any thrift store and you'll find a Guitar Hero, guitar piece, and it's just junk and nobody cares about it anymore.
Well, I was I was torn on Guitar Hero because my daughter at that age was really into it, and everybody was into it. Yeah. And we sort of embraced it. The Camarawana, the 80s hair metal band I played with, we did a couple shows where we actually had like a live Guitar Hero contest in the venue, and then we played. Yeah. And we would play some of the songs that, you know, so we've tried to like embrace it, but I hated it because, you know, as someone who spent hours and hours and hours hunched over a guitar, learning your instrument, not just a guitar, any instrument, right? Practicing, learning, and then for someone to be able to jump up and just get that feeling. And I'm not saying there's no skill involved with it. Clearly, like I played Guitar Hero, I know it does take some skill.
It's a lot of hand-eye coordination.
Yeah, you know. So I'll give it that. It takes some skill, but you're not actually playing guitar. I mean, you're getting the feeling of it. To me, it's like karaoke. It's like you're not really on stage,
right? It's supported quite a bit by yeah.
So I will say this only silver lining I could find in the whole Guitar Hero thing was the interest that my daughter, again, for example, Kaylee, suddenly knew who Kansas was. Okay, because that was one of the songs in Guitar Hero, or Can't You Hear Me Knocking, which I think is the greatest Rolling Stones song ever written. she was playing that over and over and over. So suddenly, Heart, all these like sort of classic guitar songs, Smoke on the Water, that she probably at that time, never would have shown any interest in or had any reason to listen to. Suddenly she was like, oh, I want to know more about this band Heart, or I want to check out some other Rolling Stones. So it spawned, I think, an interest in some music that broadened her musical taste a little bit. But yeah, it was, to me, it's a little bit of a fake.
Yeah, I mean, I get nothing. There's very few things that are all bad or all good. So there was some positives that came out of that, and it totally fit the time period. Again, I mean, all these things are just perfect reflections of their era. That early 2000s, video games are getting more intuitive and more interactive, and the Wii really helped a lot with that. But it just seemed like kind of I love that South Park episode where all the kids are into Guitar Hero and they just have like these blank faces as they're playing, and they're like, that kid's so good, look at him, and he's just and then Randy shows up with his guitar, his real guitar. He's like, hey kids, you like that? Watch this. And he starts playing. They're like, Dad, shut up, we're playing Guitar Hero. And he's like, oh,
totally, I mean, I think it was its own thing. Like, I played it and I got it, but I'm like, this could have been anything. It didn't have to be guitar. It could, like, we'll look at Dance Dance Revolution.
Right.
That's a game where, like, you put your feet in a certain place.
Yeah.
Are you dancing? Not really. You're playing a game and it's fun, but it just happened to be guitar, and it happened to be, so I think it was a little bit of a cheat, but, it was fun in its own weird way.
I feel like we might actually have a gap therefore in rock driven groups from from that whole era, because it didn't seem like a lot was being developed in that time. And so
and I mean, guitar has its place in certain types of music, and it has its roots in certain types of music, and I mean, there's plenty of genres of music that don't employ a lot of hip hop or sampled music. Doesn't I know Kanye West was quoted as saying like he would never use a guitar in anything, and that's fine. I mean, there's lots of other options at this point, but I mean, if we're talking specifically about guitar music, that's one thing. But I'm a guitar player, but I'm also like a musician. Take a more holistic approach. I don't feel like there has to be guitar. I don't feel like it doesn't have to be there. It's not mandatory. It's, if it expresses what you want to express, then.
Sometimes it's weird when you see a band, like I remember seeing like Katy Perry, like on TV, playing live. I'm like, oh, there's guitars in her band. Like,
Well, that does annoy me when if you're gonna have music that doesn't have guitar in it, then just don't have guitar. Like, don't pretend to play guitar. If that's what I think that's what you're.
I think he was playing. It's just because a lot of those kinds of that kind of music, it's so vocally driven, and the beat and the the bass is really heavy that you don't even realize that there's a guy playing guitar involved in that, because they're not at the forefront. It's not like the big show.
Well, and guitar is again, it's such a versatile instrument. It can be the lead, it can be the just ear-shattering, arena-filling lead instrument, or it can be very much a supporting thing. Like this band I play in, Bitter Pill, which is super fun. They're great in that they just give me the freedom to kind of do whatever I want, and I try not to stomp on the songs. I try to like jump in and play a lead when it's warranted and when it enhances the song. And they give me a lot of space, so sometimes I'm sure I take it too far. But then there's lots of times where I'm like, okay, there's a great vocal thing happening, or something else happening in the song, and I need to just lay back and be very much in support of that. And the guitar can do that. The guitar
it could be. It has settings like that too, right?
Yeah,
you can do like a muffled.
Sure. I mean, well, just you've got the. The cat just arrived.
She's been on more podcasts than she realizes.
Cats are so funny because they really have like this internal agenda. This cat wasn't even in the room.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden it's like, I'm here.
Yeah.
It's time.
So
time for something.
This is about that time that you pay attention to me.
Yeah, exactly. So, you've got the neck pickup, which, to get into the technical aspects, it's closer to the middle of the guitar, so it gets a warmer, richer sort of sound. Right? And if you use, it's called the bridge pickup, it's closer to the bridge. It gets a, like, tinnier, like, more shrill sound, like, a little louder, too.
Yeah.
Slightly out of tune, but, so, warmer. And in the middle, kind of a combination, and you can control the volume of each, so you can get sort of like semi-infinite combinations of those two things. Those are subtle differences.
Yeah.
But then again, you start adding things like amplification and effects, and that those things get exaggerated.
Yeah.
Like, for example, if I use a more overdriven tone, if I'm on this neck pickup and I kind of roll off the tone, right, which is a very like almost like a violinish.
Yeah.
They call it the woman tone. They used to call it because it sounds almost like a woman singing. Versus like much more kind of like bright sounding. Yeah. So that's a very like.
Yeah, I was gonna say very California. Yeah, I was gonna say the previous one sounded like a, like in between scenes in 90210 or something like.
Yeah.
Like Luke Perry is driving by in his car and
I think a really
or his motorcycle.
Example of that would be like American Woman. You know. Yeah.
Yeah.
Remember that American Woman?
Yeah.
Right. And then again, the brighter kind of. A harsher, everything from punk to rock kind of sound.
It's such a and so I mean that actually leads us perfectly into the last couple questions, because it says, what ideas or behavior does this convey? I think we've pretty much covered that throughout this entire talk, but then is this prescriptive or descriptive? And so the difference between that, of course, I mean, everyone knows what descriptive is. It just describes something, but prescriptive is that you're supposed to do something or feel a certain way or think something. And I think this particular guitar is a perfect example of it's meant to be played by somebody who knows how to play guitar, right? I mean, it seems to be kind of like the guitarist guitar. It's not.
Yeah, you could certainly learn on one. I think the barrier to entry is a Les Paul is a fairly expensive instrument.
Yeah.
Sometimes ridiculously so at this point. Like, I don't understand where they're getting the prices on some of these. And certainly the vintage ones, collectors items, are ridiculous. I mean, a new if you were going to go out and not like. You can buy a Japanese, or Korean made Epiphone, which would be, under $1,000.
Yeah.
But to even start with like a new American USA made, Les Paul top quality would you're talking 1,500 to up to 5,000 probably.
Wow.
Which is a lot.
Yeah.
So it's not like most mom and dad, if the kid says I want to learn to play guitar, I'm going to rush out and buy a Les Paul. I mean, some people might.
They might, yeah. Only the best.
Yeah,
for my kid, right?
Yeah, exactly. But there's there's a little chicken and the egg thing going on there too, where like I think the guitar, pop culture sort of dictates what guitar you should use and how it should look and how it should sound.
Yeah.
Based on how you perceive yourself and what kind of music. But to your point you made earlier, like that may not be the best sounding guitar for what you want to use.
Right.
And I think you mentioned this earlier, like sometimes the guitar that you see someone playing live is not the one they used in the studio.
Right.
Because the one that in the studio didn't sound as good, but it looks better on stage.
Right. And then, so you end up like that doesn't sound quite the same, but then again, I'm not here to listen to a record. I'm here to, see the genuine article.
Yeah. So I don't know if that answers your...
No, it does, because I'm glad that you brought that up. Fred Armisen, I don't know if you've ever seen his, he does Stand Up for Drummers.
Yeah.
And he does a great segment in it where he goes drum sets throughout history.
I saw that.
And how each one is a perfect representation of the time. And I remember him saying, by the time he gets to the 60s, and he has a kit, like a Ringo Starr type kit, and he's like, the Beatles had been on Ed Sullivan, everybody saw it and wanted to be, drum like that in that kind of swishy, style. And then when you get to the 90s, you got these, just kind of collected from garage sale pieces, and they're all mismatched and, have like that much heavier, deeper sound to them, a lot of tom-toms involved in it and stuff like that. So yeah, absolutely. It's a self-feeding cycles, like so the first person, Les Paul, to use this guitar set off a whole chain of events that made it so that different groups would be like, I want to replicate that sound, I'm going to use this guitar to do it, this one seems to be without very many limits, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Is like you can do pretty much anything with it. But is it the right image for what I want on stage? I mean, it looks kind of weird. Like, I love Spinal Tap, the fictitious band of the mockumentary, but you see them using Les Pauls, and it just doesn't quite match the heavy metal, glam, rock. You would think a group like that would have the more like star shaped, ridiculous.
There are some pointy ones in there for sure, but I know what you're saying, and I think, the testament to the Les Paul's diversity is, what it was originally intended for, what Les Paul was playing, if you go back and listen to some of his recordings from the 50s and 60s, is to take that instrument that he designed to make that music and to think that you could record like Whole Lotta Love, Led Zeppelin, or Aerosmith, or Sweet Child of Mine, or Loud Love by Soundgarden, like all of those, the fact that they were able to take a guitar that was designed actually to do this one thing and yet apply it to a completely different thing is kind of testament to what it is.
It is, yeah. I mean, it's
the diversity of it.
Yeah, and I love the artistic component to it too, because that's what an artist does. They take what exists and then they create something new with it. And and for the most part, unless they're super visionary, they can only work with what they have. They're not going to be able to, come up with everything brand new. So it is, I guess all roads lead back to Les Paul, Gibson's Les Paul. It's not going to.
And I have 2 other Les Pauls, and it's funny because this guitar, as much as it will always be with me, I'll never get rid of it. Like I mentioned earlier, if I'm going to be buried with one, this is probably the one, just because I identify with it and it feels so familiar in my hands. I don't play it as much. I don't play it anymore as much. I have others that are, either have a sound that works better for the particular project that I'm doing, or they might actually be a little nicer. I have guitars that are nicer than this one. I hate to insult it. It's listening. But,
your guitar will gently weep soon.
Yeah, exactly. It is. I have ones that are nicer and that I end up playing more often, but this one just has the history, it has the sentimentality, and it's great. Yeah. There's nothing wrong with it. Like, if I had to get rid of them all, I could do what I need to do with this one. Yeah. And there were times in my life when this was the only guitar I owned. But, now that I have the means, I have a whole bunch of them.
Yeah. So it's like the basis for everything, and so I guess it only makes sense that you would have it. Yeah. Could you take us out for one last
Sure.
Right? I really appreciate you not only appearing on this program, but coming to my home, which this is what I mentioned again. John, as a realtor, helped us buy this house. He was the guy that found it for us, and I couldn't be happier where we live. And so it's only fitting that he be the first to come to my, I'll use air quotes, you can't see him, but studio, because it's also garage, but for a in-person podcast. And I want to thank everybody for listening to Everything is a Primary Source, EPS Podcast. Thanks, Jon McCormack, for stopping by. And as you lead us out, let's hear some more of what the Les Paul can produce and how it's a perfect reflection of the many time periods it's been around.
Sure. And thanks so much for having me. And I'm really, it's really endearing and gratifying that you're still here and love this house. And I'm so glad that it worked out that way. That was great.
And
it's a good feeling.
Speaking of being buried, I'll probably be buried on this property.
Hopefully not anytime soon.
Right. Nothing soon. So we'll see what it, but anyway, until then, keep listening to the EPS podcast. And where can people find you online?
Oh, so Facebook, The Wheel of Awesome is a band I play with. Bitter Pill Band. They're also on Bandcamp. So I don't Paintbox.
That was your
album that I put out. That's on Spotify and all the social.
Did you use this guitar for that?
I did, here and there. Yep. Not the bulk of it, no. But
because you performed that live several times, right?
Oh,
and
yeah.
Did you use this for the live show at all?
I did not. I was, and it's funny. You sort of get, I don't know. It's like clothing in some ways. You sort of have like a favorite shirt, and like you might put your old favorite shirt away and find a new favorite shirt for a while. So at that time, my favorite was a different Les Paul that I played for the majority of that. It just fit. It just fit the sound, But
that's awesome.
A lot of that's in your head. But anyway.
Well, thank you once again, and I'm looking forward to hearing the finished product of this.
Likewise.
And Awesome.
Thanks for having me.
So you're listening to the EPS Podcast, where everything's a primary source. You can find us on all social media, specifically Instagram. I use that one a lot. Patreon.com/EPS Podcast. And Facebook, we have a Facebook group. And so keep your eyes peeled, especially if you live in the seacoast of New Hampshire and Maine area, because there'll be a lot of EPS Podcasts live that you can take part in. And we'll talk to you next time.